Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Near Memo, the Near Media podcast with Mike Blumenthal and me, Greg Sterling today. The lovely and talented Mike Blumenthal, as always.
As ever.
As you're as beautiful as the day that I met you. Let's just say that.
That might be considered a left-handed compliment. I'm not sure.
All right. Today, we are sponsor free now. So if others want to jump in and sponsor this very worthy podcast, you are welcome to contact us and inquire. Anyway, so today we are going to be talking about on episode 223. I don't believe I mentioned that. We're going to be talking about this new link policy that Google has announced around action links that was confusing to everybody. We're going to explore that. Then we'll be talking about the controversy over the decline of the open web and Google's filing and a statement in a court filing about one of their antitrust cases that the open web is already in rapid decline, and then they walked that back when it was discovered. And we'll also be talking about, on the heels of Apple's hardware event earlier this week, we'll be talking about Siri and its alleged deal with Google for AI functionality. And how would that exactly work? Because it's interesting once you sort of dig into it to think it through, it's complicated. So, Mike, why don't you tell us first about the link issue?
Sure. So there's a page on Google Business Profile Help called Business Link Policy and Guidelines that was dramatically updated over the last 2 weeks. A number of local SEOs and product experts highlighted it. And it was a bit confusing because it said that, quote, local business links must lead to a dedicated landing page for your business. The issue there is must. And for businesses with multiple location, action links must lead to a website for a specific location. Avoid general landing pages or a landing page for another location of the same business. So it wasn't clear in reading this, even by people who've been doing this for a long, working with Google on this for a long time, whether this applied to every link on your profile, particularly your website link, or not. It appeared on the first reading that it did, and many product experts interpreted it that way. I run a product expert Slack group, and when I raised it with them, everybody had the same question. What does this really mean? We went to Google, and Google clarified that this new guideline is specifically about action links. In other words, a business link in Google's definition is a link that allows customers to do things like book appointments or place an order online. It does not apply to your website link. So your website link could still go to your homepage. It still could go to a local landing page. But in the case of, like in this particular example that Greg brought up of the lawyer, the appointment link is an action link. So the action link, it is now has more rules around it. It has to go to a dedicated landing page where the user can make an action directly on that page. It can't go to a social site. It can't be a messaging link. It can't be an app store link. It can't be a link shortener. And Google will check this, they say, as much as daily to make sure that these links are compliant with this rule.
So not these links, not the website link, but
Right.
in this case, this appointment link, the action
Right.
link.
And not the messaging link either. There's a messaging link that sometimes shows, it doesn't show here, but where that link again goes to either SMS or WhatsApp. And your web page link can go to whatever page you choose on your website, I guess. But at least in terms of the action link, it has to go to an action page for that business. So it could be a third party, it could be yours. And they say you can have up to 20 action links for a given field. If you're allowing orders to come in from DoorDash and whatever, you can have multiple links there. Grubhub and DoorDash, you can have multiple links there. But this linking policy is interesting in the context that these links, particularly when they are auto-applied from third parties, have long been problematic. Google theoretically created a policy where you could report them, but it's still a problem. If one of these links, like single platform, frequently will get stuck on restaurants, it'll frequently have outdated information. It's still really hard to get rid of those links when they're bad. So I think it's always better if a business...
So, yeah, go ahead.
If a business has their own action link that they control and it goes to a page where that particular task is accomplished, That's a much better scenario than allowing third-party action links onto your site. But
Well,
onto
if the third party action link is bad, does that risk suspension?
No, well, I think it means that Google will eliminate the link, remove the link. If it 404s, for example, if it goes to an unpresent page, Google will nuke the link, which is better than it has been. I mean, historically, you would call single platform, get them to remove you from their system. They would then theoretically stop making the feed to Google and the link would stop showing up. But it doesn't flow that easily or that smoothly. A lot of times what happened, this was just last week in the forum, a business, I said, oh, call single platform, get off their system. He did. It 404'd, and then it just 404'd. It stayed there, right? One hopes that this policy comes with regular checking of these links. So when that happens, they disappear more quickly. So it
Well, we'll
should be
see, I
good news.
suppose. Yeah, I suppose we'll see.
We'll see, right? I mean, with Google, it's always that way, right?
Right. Okay, so let's move on to this controversy about Google's comments about the decline of the open web. I have the court filing in front of me so I can read
Yeah, credit to
the
Jason Kidd for highlighting this and
yes.
Barry Schwartz for writing it up too. But go ahead.
Right. So this I believe was a filing in let's see. Let me see here. It was a filing in the I believe the ad tech antitrust case. So we just had the remedies decision in the default search case, which we talked about last week, I believe, where Google essentially got off with very little penalties or remedial uh, measures. So they're going to be able to essentially proceed as normal. And there's a second antitrust case where they were found to be liable, an illegal monopoly with advertising, and now they're in the remedies phase of that. So I believe this is a filing in the context of that second case. So I'm just going to read the relevant passage here, where they are arguing against really essentially any punishment or any penalties, and certainly against structural changes, divestiture of any of their ad tech
Yeah,
properties.
it's primarily divestiture is the
Right.
suggested structural remedy.
Yes, that's right. AI reshaping ad tech at every level. Non-open web display ad formats like connected TV and retail media are exploding in popularity, and Google's competitors are directing their investments to these new growth areas. The fact is that today, the open web is already in rapid decline, and plaintiffs' divestiture proposal would only accelerate that decline, harming publishers who currently rely on open web display advertising revenue. So Google is kind of semi-opportunistically, or not opportunistically, because they're characterizing it. This discussion of the decline of the open web supports their position that there shouldn't be any divestiture, because if there is a divestiture of any of their ad tech, that will only further the decline of the open web, exacerbate and accelerate the existing problem. And then when that was brought up, as you said, and exposed, they sort of walked it back, or they denied that that was a characterization of the web in general. They tried to say, well, this is really about advertising in particular. This doesn't reflect our opinions or feelings about the open web, which they have said is thriving and is not being harmed by their behavior around AIOs or other features of their search experience where they're referring less traffic out.
Right. So 2 weeks ago, that was Liz Reed. I think we talked about it, that she said they're
Yeah.
referring more traffic out. The open web is more lively than ever, more content than ever. And then this week they said the open web is in rapid decline. They specifically reached out to Barry Schwartz at Search Engine Roundtable and said accelerating decline of the open web specifically referred to the advertising environment, not to the content.
Which I think is, well, I think is spin, but go ahead.
It's a spin. And the question is, with
What do they
Google,
really think?
what do they really think? What do they really mean? Is the open web declining? Isn't it declining? I mean, certainly the web is becoming more closed because Google it broke the quid pro quo of share your site for traffic, because that's being broken and changed and denigrated. Many sites are moving over to a paywall, and many of the bigger sites, New York Times, Washington Post, have built their own ad networks as a result. I mean, one could argue it's both are true. And maybe Google is being honest here, but one could easily argue that they're being self-serving, duplicitous, saying what they need to say in the moment they need to say it, right? So you get your pick, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think in a legal filing in general, the party is going to say whatever they think they need to say to persuade the court of their position. They're going to make any representation that they think is advantageous. And, I think that in this context, I don't think it refers exclusively to ad tech. They're talking broadly about preserving the open web, and that publishers who rely on advertising in the open web are going to be harmed, and thus the open web will be harmed. It's spin on their part now to say, "Oh, we're really only talking about this little sort of one aspect of that." So I think they're trying to make the broader argument that the web is in decline, and this will further that decline to raise alarm with the court. So no divestiture because that will harm the open web. And then Google says when it serves them, the open web is healthy. And I think prior to the default search remedial ruling, which was a slap on the wrist more than anything, they were arguing, oh, the open web is totally healthy, because if they said something like the open web is in decline, that would be supportive of the idea that Chrome needs to be sold. There need to be more aggressive measures taken to restrain Google. These big walled gardens and these big advertising platforms, but Google in particular, has been driving the decline of publishers because, I mean, there's a chart which I don't have time to pull up that showed the distribution of ad revenue across media, right? So it was the internet, broadcast TV, print media, direct mail, and so on. And there were about 15 categories. And all of them combined do not equal the internet revenue. And internet revenue is dominated by, I think it's something like 10 companies control 70 or 80% of internet revenue. So there's been an enormous concentration of wealth and power, just like in the broader economy, in the hands of a very few companies. I think it's this aggregation of ad revenue that's happened over the course of 20 plus years that has led to a lot of reactions, like people putting up paywalls and moving away from the open web, because you can't make money as a publisher. You can't, there's no sustainable revenue unless you have so much traffic. You're one of these massive brands, and then you can make money as a content site or as a publisher. But, you know, people that used to have ad sales directly can't really sustain themselves in the same way. I mean, even broadcast TV, which used to be the single largest channel for advertising, is dwarfed several times over by the internet now. And again, when we talk about the internet, we're really talking about Google and Meta and Amazon and just a couple of other companies.
I mean, oligarchs define our reality. So it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, well, so that in that context, of this enormous concentration of power, the court last week should have broken up, should have ordered the sale of Chrome. Not that it would have been sustained on appeal. Should have ordered the sale of Chrome. Should have been much more aggressive. The ad tech remedial court should require a divestiture of some of Google's properties. The EU just after a report that said, oh, there's only going to be a modest fine because we're trying to negotiate tariffs with Trump and we don't want to piss Trump off. The the European Commission did come through, with a $3.5 billion fine for Google's ad tech monopoly over there. And of course,
although there's two things about that are interesting. One, they announced it on a Friday afternoon with no press conference.
Right, but it got covered. It got
covered, and Trump responded, but they did try to do it sort of on the QT. And
that's naive.
But just interesting that those are the dynamics.
They're not trumpeting it.
Correct. And two, they gave Google 60 days to suggest a structural remedy that they would consider. So it's still TBD to what it really means. And some of that will depend to some extent on what the U.S. courts decide in this regard. And they're going to,
I think there's no reason. I would be very surprised if the court, I think it's in Virginia, is the federal court that's dealing with the ad tech case. I would be very surprised if we saw anything very bold from them. I mean, it's arguably easier. The remedial decision on the ad tech side is arguably easier because you can break certain piece parts off in a way that maybe the judge in the default search case didn't think you could.
And also the
Or
facts are a little different. I mean, Google has acquired almost all of those parts as opposed to Chrome, which they built from the ground
which
up,
they
right?
built, right? Exactly.
Right. So the facts are different.
But I think that the likelihood that we're going to see the court come in and do something really bold and ballsy, to use the vernacular, it is small. I mean, the district court in the default search case kind of chickened out. And I think part of that is because we're in a very different political climate now than we were when the liability decision was rendered. And I think the judge was fearful, as I said last week, of being reversed on appeal. And so he did this kind of like, oh, well, I'm going to do these things at the margins, and I have all this humility, and we have to be mindful of this, that, and the other. But when you look at that chart that shows the ad revenue concentration, I mean, it's really distorted the whole media economy, the concentration of power in so few hands on the internet. But anyway, we'll see. We'll wait and see. Okay, now on to Siri. Every time I say that, it's turning on. I don't want it to ask me a question. So this week,
should do the asking.
yes, stop talking, Siri. This week, Google had its hardware event where they introduced a new iPhone.
Apple had it.
Or sorry, not Google. We could just combine them
See this
into
meeting.
Gapple, or I don't know how you would pronounce it with anyway.
Google.
Goople. Okay. That's better. Goople. Apple had its hardware event in which they introduced a new.
ChatGPT.
Okay, it's
Could
really
you
time
clarify
for
what
annoying. Siri used to be this really fun, interesting thing. Now it's totally annoying.
To be clear, two things. Firstly, that I need to say two caveats here. One is I'm invested in Apple stock. And two, I use Siri all the time. In fact, last night, my wife and I had a Siri argument where she was trying to convince me of something. So she asked Siri a question about how many calories were in walnuts leading to weight gain. And so then I asked Siri another question, was whether sleep deprivation caused weight gain. So we had a Siri argument where she would ask Siri a question, I would ask it a question, and the answers would compete. So we didn't have to actually argue.
Well, I mean, the reality is that sleep deprivation does lead to weight gain, and walnuts consumed in moderation are fine.
Right. But she was thinking I was beyond moderation. So anyways.
All right. Okay. Starting over. Apple's hardware event got a thin iPhone 17. I want to say whatever. I mean, people think that that's a precursor to the foldable phone next year, but you know, it's super thin, better specs, et cetera, et cetera. A bunch of new Apple Watch models and software upgrades. But the cool thing was the translation feature of the new Apple AirPods, where you can do speak in your language and it'll translate on the phone screen. You can show it to somebody and they can see what you're trying to communicate.
You hear the translation too.
Yes, and then the really cool thing was that two people with AirPods could speak different languages at each other and have a conversation. I could speak to you in Dutch, and you could speak to me in Thai or Mandarin Chinese, and we could converse seemingly without a problem. Those are asides. There was no discussion of Siri, or maybe there was in passing, but I missed it. But there really wasn't any discussion of Siri, which is typically talked about during their developer conference. But Mark Gurman at Bloomberg earlier reported that Apple had decided to work with Google, was testing a Google integration of Gemini as the sort of intel inside for the new Siri, which is supposed to operate like ChatGPT. It's supposed to be able to provide a search-like experience or an AI conversational experience, which includes search-like queries. And Google is going to allegedly power that, which raises all kinds of interesting questions.
So the first thing is that aspect is going to be powered on
Apple's private cloud.
Apple's private cloud compute there, which in theory creates a totally encrypted data chain from your phone to the server.
Right. That Google in theory won't get access to any of that data.
Google in theory won't get access to, right? So what hard to understand is what is the interface out to the search? Will that include, it's going to include world knowledge, but maybe it's more static world knowledge. Maybe it's not a dynamic web index, right? And now we know that Gemini has access to the web index and they use it regularly in answering, but we don't know how far they're going to drive Gemini beyond sort of static training data into things like the dynamic
Well,
web results, right? So there could be still on Siri, when you make a query that could be answered by AI or search, gives you a little dialog box. Do you want to do this on the web search, or do you want to do this on ChatGPT?
right, which is an interesting scenario because it suggests that if there's training data or static information, a database of static information, that it could try and answer a bunch of questions with that. If it can't do that, something more current or not in the data, then it might link out to Google or prompt you to, do you want to search Google? I have to believe that there's something like that. I mean, Google would not enter into this negotiation with Apple or this. I mean, Google wants to preserve the Apple relationship for obvious reasons, and now they can because the court has allowed the payments to continue. But if Google were simply providing Gemini functionality to Apple and Apple was going to deliver all the information within the context of an AI-like experience, then it would displace Google for many queries, right? Things that you would, yes,
Well, there's two search environments on Apple. There is Spotlight, which
yes,
I believe, and I have hypothesized, Siri is going to take over the role of
yes,
Spotlight.
undoubtedly,
And then
undoubtedly,
there's Safari search, the web bar search,
which is the browser, yes.
the browser search. And those two search functions largely are distinct and unique.
So it's going to so Google will maintain default search on Safari. I think that's
Safari.
100%.
And so in terms of displacement of Google, not necessarily going to happen because there's so many Safari searches versus again,
Well,
it will.
that's because people don't really understand what the possibilities of Spotlight search are, and Siri is, pardon my expression, kind of sucks at the moment. It can do certain things, but it can't do a lot of things. Don't mean to put you on the defensive, Mike.
I'm
But
not on the defensive. I can tell you, I have persisted with Siri since 2015, mostly as an experiment in frustration. But what I have noticed is given that persistence, I have noticed small, incremental, steady
yes,
gains. And I've noticed that,
too small.
well, yes, I wouldn't disagree there. So I'm not on the defensive on that point. But also, it has once in iOS, I think it was 16 or 15, I don't know, they implemented a voice level security. So they would voice check me to make sure that I had the privilege of adding items to a specific shopping list, right? So that required voice verification. And and it had to learn my voice and it had to learn my wife's voice. And initially it was very bad. If I woke up in a gravelly voice, it wouldn't get through. That has improved dramatically. So its ability to distinguish my voice has improved dramatically, even with more background noise, which was
So
always a problem. So
right.
all I'm
So
saying is that Siri,
yes, it's gotten better.
I've been
for
watching
sure.
it very closely, and it has the ability to parse speech against a noisy background, which to me is the fundamental first step of success. Is gotten a lot better, right? Still doesn't have the knowledge on the back end, but it has the ability to parse the language into a query
Yes.
much better than
Okay.
it ever did. And that to me is step one to this improvement.
Yes. Yes. But
There's the defense. Now you can go after me all
okay,
you want.
yes, I will acknowledge that Siri has improved over time, but in contrast to something like ChatGPT, it just is terrible. Now, it can control your phone, it can do certain things on your phone, which is good, but what you want from it is a lot more. So let's say hypothetically that Gemini is the secret sauce that Siri needs to really become functional across a broad range of informational queries and other kinds of things. Most people, to the extent that Siri works or worked, would use it, right? Why would you go to the browser and do whatever you're going to do on the browser? You would just go to Siri. That's the path of least resistance. And you would say, convert, this imperial measure to a metric measure, or who won the game last night, or the walnut question. What's gonna be worse for me, walnuts or sleep deprivation? You would want Siri to answer all those questions. You would
Well,
not want to go
let
to
me ask,
Google. You
let
wouldn't.
me ask you a quick question here to interrupt your rant. How much talking do you
Thank you.
do to ChatGPT versus typing to ChatGPT currently?
How much talking? Well, I mostly type. And the reason that the advanced voice
Mike is
mode.
making yes, I
No,
hear you.
no, no. I have to explain. Advanced voice mode is a fantastic technological capability. You can talk to it for an hour and a half, uninterrupted, right? Siri will just break if you try, and you have to keep invoking Siri. Hey Siri, hey Siri, hey Siri, hey Siri, hey Siri. But you can just keep talking. But the reason I don't talk to advanced voice mode more is because I want to see, in some instances, I want to see the outcome, which you can't until you disengage. And I'm annoyed, increasingly annoyed by the sycophancy. That's a really great question. Let me know if you didn't watch the South Park episode on sycophancy, you need to watch it because it's so funny and so accurate. And it's really annoying. It's completely annoying, and I don't want to be
Greg, you're
subjected
so
to the.
brilliant.
Yeah, I don't, well, they don't doesn't say that to me, but maybe it's
Okay.
because it's true.
I'm saying it to you.
But oh, that's a really great. I mean, just the demeanor of the whole thing is annoying to me. So that's the main reason why I'm typing more than using advanced
The
voice
reality
mode.
is that search has many modes. Typing is not going to go away.
I'm
Voice
not
has
saying
a
it's
lot
going to
of
go
room
away.
for improvement. And there are times you're in the kitchen cooking, your hands are a mess,
Of course,
or you're moving through the house and you are getting ready to go to bed and you want to plan tomorrow's weather. There are many times when voice makes more sense than stopping what you're doing and typing.
totally.
And there are
I am not
times when typing makes more sense than talking.
100%. I am
And
not
so the question is
argue.
an experience that smoothly moves between those two, offers
Yes,
up the best interface at the best time with the
yes.
best answer, right?
And all I am saying, I am not arguing against anything that you said. All I am saying is that if Siri actually
Other than,
worked.
are you arguing against the fact that I said you were brilliant, or is
No, I'm
that
not going to argue
sycophancy
against
too
that. I
much? Or
won't argue
oh,
against that.
okay, all right, just
If
checking.
if Siri actually worked, you would use it. If you were an iPhone owner, you would use it. And if it
I
actually
do.
delivers, right, and I do too, but I use it for a narrow set of uses. If it delivered a wider breadth of information, you would not use Google for that. And the problem there, back to this question of integration, the problem there is that to whatever extent Google loses queries on the iPhone, it loses money. And so, what would Google agree to with Apple that would not diminish its revenue? That is the interesting question. And that's probably, we stay the default search on Safari. And in certain kinds of web search contexts, you hand off to us. I mean, Apple has a local graph, knowledge graph, and they have maps. They could substantially eat into Google's local query volume on the iPhone if they produced a really great experience. And Google, one would think, would go into that negotiation saying, we have to protect our ad revenue. And the iPhone is an extremely important distribution channel for them. In the United States, I mean, not in the rest of the world, but in the United States, the iPhone is 60% of smartphone users ish versus 40% for Android.
And it's the better healed, more spending
Yes, right.
users.
Especially
Absolutely.
now as they keep raising the prices of everything. But
I mean,
yes.
the browser experience, though, is typically a text-based typing experience. And as long as the browser is a key way of accessing information, I believe that Google's revenue and Apple's relationship based on that is pretty solid. But I think that, when I look at what Siri can do now, I see Spotlight as potentially driving a wedge into that slowly over time as people learn what information, like you've learned what you can use Siri for. As its capabilities expand, I believe, like AI is eating publisher results on search, I think AI is going to eat search results on the phones, right?
100%. If it's good, you're going to use it. You're not going to use Google. Why would I go to the browser and open the browser and type my little, I mean,
Or why would you go to Gemini the app or ChatGPT the app?
You're not going to go to, you never go to Gemini the app. Gemini,
Right.
people don't go to Gemini the app.
My brother does.
Well,
You
there's
know,
a group of Android, does he have an Android phone?
No, he's got an iPhone.
Okay, well, there are a group of users, often Android users, who use Gemini, but the market share gap between ChatGPT and Gemini is massive. And Google is pushing the Gemini technology, or whatever it is, the underlying AI technology, into AI mode, AI overviews, workspace, Chrome. That is how they're getting usage. They're not getting usage from direct Gemini adoption, and they're very confused about the brand and what to lead with. And I mean, I wrote in their newsletter earlier this week, they've got, if you look at all the AI brands, if you say, well, name all the Google AI properties, you go into Gemini or ChatGPT and you say, identify all the AI properties. After you clean out the hallucination, there are about like 15 or 16 of them. And if you're talking about search, it's AI mode, AI overviews, it's Gemini, and it's web guide, which has gotten very little exposure. At some point, they're going to have to clean this all up.
They've never been good at that. The way they function is to throw a lot of shit at the wall and see what sticks. But
it's worked for them because of their monopoly position, right? There's no pressure for them to do, now that they've made it through this antitrust case and they've sort of weathered the initial storm of ChatGPT and their usage seems to be stable. There's no pressure for them to do anything. I mean, they've got a roadmap that they're following, but they could just
the pressure will be ultimately consumers drifting over some TikTok or someplace
that
else.
depends entirely on how much better ChatGPT gets and these other products get. If Siri gets much better, stop it. If Siri gets much better,
Siri abuse alert. You may not want to watch this section where Greg throws his phone on the floor.
Yeah, if Siri gets much better, if ChatGPT gets much better, particularly in local, then Google has to worry. Right now, it seems to have weathered that initial storm in the same way that it weathered the storm of apps. Steve Jobs, people aren't using search. They go to apps. They get direct information from apps. Google did the same thing, all hands on deck, and they made that transition, and they're more successful than they've ever been. And they seem to be making the AI transition successfully, but we'll see. I mean, it really depends on how good these competing products get. And to say one final thing, the perceived competitive influence of ChatGPT in the market is one of the things that saved Google's bacon with the default search case. Oh, well, we've got this bona fide competitor finally. We don't have to do this divestiture because the market is finally competitive. It's not truly competitive, but there's a perception that it's more competitive. And, on some level, it's incrementally more competitive. Okay. That's the end of my rant. That's what 2 cups of coffee will do. If I had 3, it would be, turn it up to 11.
Back next week for that.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for tolerating this version of the podcast. We have a bunch of exciting guests coming up. Barry Schwartz, Crystal Tang, and other people coming up in the next couple of weeks. Anna Martinez from Uberall. And so we'll be excited to talk to them about various issues. And I promise fewer rants going forward. Thanks again.